Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Smarter Building podcast powered by Symetri. My name's Richard Brayshaw, and I'm the Construction Business Area Director at Symetri, and will be your host for today. The purpose of this podcast is to help everyone involved in the design, construction, and ongoing operation process keep up with the evolving digital landscape in construction as client demands for smarter and more sustainable building grows. Today, I'm joined by Mark Thorley, co-founder of KOPE.ai, which is the first purpose-built platform for offsite construction, which aims to bridge the gap between design, manufacturing, and construction. Thanks for joining us, Mark. It's great to have you.
Awesome. Good to be here, Richard, and thanks for having me as well.
So before we delve into the interesting world of offsite construction, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and your passions?
Yeah, sure. Oh God, where do I start? So, I've got a background in architecture. Soon after leaving university, I kind of moved away from architecture and found myself in kind of BIM managerial roles and technology roles for the likes of Grimshaw, AECOM. And to be honest, I think, in my early parts of my career, I was always fairly intrigued with how software and technology could play a part in, what we were doing as an industry and, where we were moving to. And because of that, there was kind of a natural transition from where I was within BIM and technology into software development. I think once you get that early interest within software development, you get a little bit of a sense of achievement of building some automation. There's kind of no looking back from there. So 2016, I left a company I was with a colleague of mine. We set up our first consultancy called Design Tech, and we were focused on building small automation workflows around projects delivered in BIM. That went fairly well. We went on to sell to a larger US consultancy. And then in 2019, we set up our second company together, which was MATLAB. This time round, we were a little bit more focused on building products and began our journey as a product consulting company, serving all of kind of the AEC market. And what we found over the first couple of years of the business was we started to work quite actively with, these companies who were building, volumetric homes within factories and things like that. So this was quite intriguing for us because it was fairly new to what we'd done previously. It was moving away from traditional design and construction processes. After working within that space for, the past kind of 2 or 3 years, we started to see kind of firsthand some of those challenges that those types of companies were having. Whilst very kind of complex, we've got a team of incredibly smart people. So, way smarter than me. So, I think if anyone was going to move this forward, industry forward in terms of off-site construction, I felt like it was going to be our team. So with that said, around 2021, we started working on a software platform called KOPE. And that was primarily to try and address some of those challenges we were seeing around adopting offsite construction. So forward on 18 months from that, we've completed 2 rounds of funding. We've raised over £2 million. And, we have the joy of working with, some of these truly innovative construction companies who are, again, trying to solve a lot of those complex problems within offsite construction. So, yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a background as to who I am and how I've got to where I am now.
That's great. Thanks very much. Any favourite sports teams or bands that you'd like to?
Well, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago when Manchester United used to be a good football team, I'd have probably said them. But
okay, quickly moving on. quickly moving on. Cool. So in terms of offsite construction, it'd be good if you could just give us a bit of an overview for those who may not be familiar, or also just in terms of how you define offsite construction and exactly what you're looking to help people with.
I think, offsite construction is an interesting term because, we in this industry, we seem to get bogged down quite a lot by terminology. You'll have heard of modern methods of construction, DFMA, prefabrication. In the States, they call it industrialized construction. We seem to get bogged down with the nuances around, different terms and what the differences are and what the similarities are. But, to me, they kind of all mean the same thing in some degree. Offsite construction, in my eyes, is just simply referring to the creation of some part of the building, whether it be a component, whether it be a complete module, whatever that scale be, but creating that building component away from the project site and only kind of transporting it to site for assembly at a later date. And that could mean, manufacturing stuff in facilities or factories on the other side of the country. It could be a temporary facility, just outside of the site. Any one of these things is fine. And I think, when we look at the drivers for why, all of these terms, the DFMA, the prefabrication, the MMC, why they're all so prevalent at the moment, it's because we're in a bit of a dire, situation within construction. We need better safety. Everything that happened with Grenfell and the fallout from that around the safety bill is, quite high up on the agenda at the moment. We've got a pretty substantial climate crisis that we're going through at the moment. So there's a real need for this industry to improve on its carbon impact and, reduce the amount of waste it's producing. We're always striving for bigger and cheaper things. So, but with that, we still need to ensure, the build qualities are there and, we're reducing programs. So there's lots of these things that come into the mix around the construction industry. And I think as a whole, this is the way the industry is going to go. Call it whatever you want, prefabrication, modular construction, whatever.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think a lot of these factors have come together, and maybe that sort of leads into my next question around timing. You mentioned you've been with MATLAB for a few years, and I know you were building lots of different solutions to lots of different challenges. But over the last, 6, 9, 12 months? I can't remember now. Over the last short period of time, you've really focused on the COPE element and sort of gone all in on that on that piece. And is that a combination of those factors you've just talked about, or was there something that really drove it forward from a single project point of view?
Yeah.
Why
it's funny you asked that question, because I've been asked that question a couple of times over the last year or so. And I think there's probably two parts to my answer. The first one is quite a selfish one, which is, I think I've always had aspirations to build a single product and to have a sole focus on a single product. My past two companies have always been product consulting, where we'd be going out to different companies and building bespoke projects. So we'd be building up little mini teams, and each little team would be building their own thing. And I think from my own standpoint, I love building teams and take pride in seeing kind of great minds come together. And we've got a fantastic team here. So I've always had this ambition that we would be working on the same product collectively as an entire group, rather than kind of these different companies. So I think that drive to find that single product always existed. Just what that product was always, up for discussion. And I think, where we are as an industry, and kind of coming back to why we're kind of, tying into offsite construction a little bit more, I think we really are at a bit of a tipping point with construction. We've talked about it for long enough. I mentioned some of those drivers that we need to see changed within the industry, but it kind of does feel like it's now or never. The Farmer report, which I'm sure you're familiar with, 2016. I think that gave us about 10 years to make a change. Otherwise, we'd see some significant challenges, start to happen within the labour force and other things. And I think we're six years into that, 2016 to 22, 6 years into that report, so another 4 years before we're at the end of that 10-year period. Yeah, it kind of feels like if we don't follow through on this change now, there's not much, not to be a doomsday, but there's not much hope left. What are the other alternatives? When you take into account some of that aging workforce and the challenges we've got around the labour market. So yeah, I think single product was always a vision of mine, always a desire I wanted to do within my industry. And then secondly, I don't think there's anything better to focus on at the moment than offsite construction, given where we are as a market.
Well, I think it'll be hugely beneficial for all those who are able to adopt it. And in terms of that, were there any specific companies or projects that have kickstarted this, or can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you're working on without giving away any industry secrets or anything like that?
No. I think, I think as an industry, we do need to be a bit more open and talk about, the successes and the failures equally. I mean, we're working with some great companies. I guess it depends on how we categorize them. We're doing a lot of work with companies we would class as offsite builders. So the likes of Top Hat and Ilka Homes, who are primarily delivering volumetric homes within a factory. These companies didn't exist 10 years ago. So, we're starting to see new entries into the market, and they're kind of challenging some of that status quo and taking on some of the larger traditional house builders, which I think is quite interesting. Because let's face it, the housing sector's needed a bit of a kick for a while in relation to the housing crisis and stuff. So it's, I think it's quite nice to see some of these companies really kind of trying to shake up what can be done around that. Doing a lot of work with a company in Canada as well. We'll give a shout out to a company called Z Modular. Really forward facing and innovative company. They spun out of the Zekelman Steel Group, so a big steel provider over in North America, and they're doing again a lot of volumetric modular residential buildings using steel, light gauge steel frames. And what's quite interesting about those guys is, everyone talks about kit parts in our industry. It's a term that's becoming quite common. And they're really the only company that I've personally seen that have actually followed through on that. So they've actually, been able to put themselves in a position where they've been able to design and manufacture a kit of parts that is actually reusable in different buildings. So I think that's quite an interesting company to kind of dive into. And then, back on home soil, the likes of Lango Rourke and Mace are doing some great things. We're doing some work with Bartamalo as well in the States, who are, again, all three of those kind of pushing the envelope of what a contractor, has been over the last 20 years and what they're going to look like over the next 20 years. And I think business models will evolve. They'll have to adapt. So it's, there's some great people within those organizations who are kind of leading that, which is good to see. And then, I think, outside of the big players, I think there's lots of interesting stuff going on with some of the smaller manufacturers, who are really focused on trying to productize, some of their offerings and some of the components they can, whether that be floor cassettes, whether it be precast columns, any small subsets of buildings. And, we're starting to see some of these manufacturers come to the forefront a little bit there. And again, lots of these manufacturers exploring different types of materials that they could use, which, wouldn't typically be common in buildings as we know them now. So, I think, I could talk a lot about all these different companies, but I think it's good to see, lots of different variety going on.
Yeah, I think from my side of things, I think, as you say, these modular builders have come in and shaken up the industry a little bit and changed the way organizations are working. But from my point of view, that now I see there aren't that many large house builders or tier one contractors who don't have some sort of modular or offsite building strategy. You mentioned Mace, you mentioned Lang O'Rourke, and they've kind of looked over the fence at what some of these small guys are doing and seem to have reacted. Mm-hmm. Do you think the pressure has come simply from the market in terms of these guys starting up? Do you think it's circumstances from an economical point of view, that, as you mentioned, the labour shortage? What do you feel are the key drivers that, and what advantages does it bring to these bigger organisations who have always focused on the traditional methods and are now beginning to dip their toes either through partnership or creating their own factories and working on this?
Yeah, again, I think that's quite an interesting observation. I think that, if you speak to some of these, bigger tier one contractors, there's probably been a bit of a realization over the last couple of years that, the writing is on the wall to a certain extent within the construction industry, and things do need to change. If they carry on exactly the way they're going at the moment, they'll probably run into, as you said, labour shortages and, challenges for constructing things in the future. So, their hand to a certain extent has been forced a little bit. You can quote multiple McKinsey reports that have been out over the last few years. I think there was a big one, 2019, the next normal in construction, which, spoke a lot about kind of how the value chain was going to change, the different value pools and where all that money was going to sit in the future on construction projects. So, and a big portion of that was, the contractor potentially losing out. So again, they have to revisit kind of how their business model is and, what their new offerings might be. So I think, what we're seeing is probably just a bit of a natural reaction to that. I think, the only thing maybe I would add to kind of what I've just said there is, from what we've seen, there isn't one shoe size fits all. It's some companies will invest, as you say, and, they'll have their own manufacturing facilities. Look at Lango Rope for as an example. I think they've had that factory there for, I don't know, probably 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit less than that. Don't quote me on that, but others will have a much more kind of asset light approach and partner with smaller suppliers. So I think either way there are decisions and different business models, and there's multiple ways that these companies can be successful moving forward. But I think we need to remember that they're all kind of long-term strategies. They shouldn't be made on a short-term perspective. So if you invest 100 million in setting up a factory, and bring in a lot of robotics, guess what? You're not going to, suddenly recoup that overnight. So there has to be that, that allowable roadmap in place, and that needs to be planned. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think contractors have always been the kings of the construction industry. So when we start to see them changing, I think that's going to have a knock-on effect to, everyone downstream, the supply chain and the designers and everything else as well.
Cool. So just moving forwards a little bit in terms of challenges in moving to offsite construction, what do you believe are the key things that need to be overcome from a technology and a non-technology perspective in order for these organizations to thrive and probably be more profitable in that area, and then begin to push more business down that channel? What are the key challenges we need to get past?
I think there's lots of challenges, which is kind of why we're seeing a bit of an uphill battle against adoption. It is rethinking the supply chain. It is, changing how things are procured. There is a big portion of that comes into kind of the liability of, where the risk sits. And, so there's lots of kind of different processes and things that need to be in place that are changing kind of how a typical construction process would work, purely just by doing some aspects of it offsite. So, I think aside from that, we've always been quite heavily focused on the design side of things. So, for us kind of sitting within that design space, both on a traditional project and, now on some of these offsite projects, there is a quite significant difference in what's required and what's needed from design teams in terms of, the level of detail that's required, the tolerances that you can work to. No longer can you just kind of fix things on site, if you like, get a hammer and, hammer it back into place. It's, it doesn't quite work like that. So, I think that puts a lot more emphasis on the design teams earlier on, to kind of work through, some of that accuracy. And that's obviously not to mention, some of the effort around documenting some of that stuff. So whether they're documenting it for, the manufacturing facility, the factory floor, or whether they're doing that for assembly purposes. So, I think, those changes are kind of what's kind of, in my mind, the biggest challenges for us in moving towards offsite.
And what about sort of on the owner and the client side and the way they purchase? From what I've seen, there's always a little bit of trepidation about buying something that's been built in a warehouse and maybe allowing the specification to be shaped somewhat so that more elements can be built off-site. Is that an education piece that needs to happen with clients and people and just everybody involved in the procurement of buildings?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that comes to a bit of a stigma that offsite construction's had. If you go back into the 60s, 70s when they kind of started doing some of this prefabrication, and America kind of had a bad hit with trailer parks and things like this being known as kind of prefabrication. It's kind of carrying a lot of that old stigma. And what's happened over the last 5-10 years is technology's moved significantly. Investment has moved significantly from where we were previously. So, actually what we can do now is we can build things in a factory with a lot more consistency, and to a lot better quality than what we could have done previously. So actually, not only is it comparable to traditional construction, that it's actually, potentially even better. You can look to, I think it's Ilka Homes who recently outlined with Octopus their net zero house, so the first house in the UK to, have no energy bills for an entire year, which, given where we are in terms of kind of energy prices rising, these are only good things. So I think, there's lots of good publicity out there around offsite construction if if you're out there looking for it, and likewise, there can be quite some bad publicity at times as well. So it's about finding the relevant bits of information and kind of concentrating on those.
Okay, and so from a negative point of view, I've read a lot about sort of offsite construction companies that have sprung up and seem to get lots of investment and seem to be heading along the right path, and then all of a sudden they're gone in a very short space of time. Do you think, what do you think the key reasons are for that? Is that just an economic piece, or do you think there's something they've missed, or why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think it's slightly frustrating, because we're part of this space now, and I think you look outside of our industry and just into the general media, I think negative publicity seems to always get, bigger headlines than the good stuff. I think a lot of the news that's happened recently, the Caledonian one, the Urban Splash, we were working quite closely with Urban Splash at the time. So, I think it's difficult to speculate on kind of each individual case because I guess, unless you're part of the management team, it's always difficult to know the exact ins and outs of what's happened. It could be bad decisions by senior management, it could be incorrect business models. As you said, it could be something to do with the climate and, economically where we are as a society. Who knows? But yeah, I think, whenever we, see anything negative around offsite construction, certainly in-house, we try and remind ourselves about some of the good things that are happening. I saw the other day, Tide, who have, been doing a fantastic job in offsite construction for a number of years now. I think they got the green light on a modular scheme in Canary Wharf, which I think will be the UK's tallest modular tower, 160 meters tall, or something along those lines. So surpassing what they've done in George Street in Croydon. So there is lots of good things going on. I think just naturally as a society we always kind of hone in on the negative things. I think whilst there's always going to be those negative stories, I think we just, as an industry and as a sector, we just need to accept that that's part of the journey. Not everyone's going to survive. Not everyone's going to succeed. So especially when we're trying to make such a seismic change within the sector. We just need to kind of equally remember to celebrate some of those successes as well, I think.
Okay. Have you seen a pattern in those that are performing well, adopting technology well, or am I trying too much to link these two things together? Is the tech helping some of these organisations overcome typical challenges?
I think yeah, certainly the tech will play a part in it, and I hope that KOPE plays a big part in that as well. From our point of view, there seems to be this obsession within the industry to focus on building this kit of parts, this static kit of parts, and maybe a lot of that's been driven by some of the work we've all done in Revit over the last 10-15 years or whatever. Whilst I think that that's a step in the right direction in terms of standardizing a set of components and creating standardization, for me as an industry, we need to move towards mass customization rather than standardization. And the main reason for that, and I touched on it before with CMOD, it's really not that easy to create that kit of parts. It's to create a kit of parts with all the manufacturing information in it, all the information required for transport and assembly. I've actually seen very few companies successfully do that. So, even if you do, somehow manage to invest, a lot of time and effort into building some of those components, you still need to then produce all the shop drawings for it. How many of those components can then be used on another building, those exact components. Just to give you an example, like take a precast column. Let's say we're working on a project that's got floor to floor heights of 4 meters, and then the next project is 3.5 meters. That's a new component. You need a new set of manufacturing drawings for that. You need, potentially different crane or potentially different logistics to get it to site. So, I think what we're trying to do with KOPE is, we're trying to think more at a high level than that. So let's define what those core systems are. Let's define what those constraints of those systems might be. Take an example of a column. What's its min and max size for transport? What's its min and max size for manufacturing? What's the maximum weight it can be to be transported in cranes in position? All these different constraints, and kind of building up a skeleton like that. And I think once we begin to think in a way where we define these products at that system level, and we know what those constraints and limitations are, then we can, start to understand how maybe that product can interact within its context. And, that's exactly where we're trying to go with KOPE, is to take those building systems and understand how they actually interact within the context of the design. And if we can get to a position where we can tie those things together and all that's done kind of automatically and optimized, we're taking off a big chunk of that design piece at the start, and that's kind of where we're planning to go.
Yep. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense to try and simplify all that process. In terms of the future, what needs to be addressed? Let's park technology for a second. From a non-technology standpoint, to see growth in the sector, to see real change. Can the government do something? Is it because there's a lot of good that is obvious in terms of, the sustainability piece, the economic piece moving forwards. All the large contractors are saying it's just too expensive to operate on site and potentially have timing issues and all that kind of thing. So what more can change from a non-technology perspective to see a real big...
I think there's a couple of things, but I think, to hone in on what you said there around the government, I think, the government can help. They need to continue in their commitment towards MMC, so modern methods of construction. I think we need to, there's some people doing some great stuff in the industry. You look at the OA, so the Offsite Alliance, Make UK Modular Group, these types of organizations are having, the right conversations with different industry bodies and government and policymakers and things like that. So, I think we just need to kind of continue on this path we're on. I compare it quite often to, you've been in this industry long enough, Richard. You'll remember before kind of the years of BIM, and then obviously, as a country, I think we kind of led the way on BIM to a certain extent. That stemmed initially, if you remember, from the government wanting to understand a little bit more about the buildings and the assets that they had and having no clear visibility of that. And so it was actually about structuring their data better, and to get structured data, you need a structured way of inputting that data, and that's kind of where BIM came from. And you think of PAS 1192, which then turned into a British standard, and then later into the ISO. Like, it kind of feels like we're on a little bit of a similar journey with offsite construction and MMC. So what those policies and what those standards might look like, I have no idea, but it does feel like we're moving in that direction. And I just hope that given all of the given the bits of bad publicity that seem to make the news, that the people in the right positions within government, within the ones making policies that will help, can actually kind of see through that, and they listen to the right people. And then I guess there are other things that are going on in government and in policy as well around pre-manufactured value, which again I think is a big help. So those contractors and developers who are maybe a little bit hesitant to take on some of this offsite stuff, there's kickbacks and there's benefits and potential funding incentives available for them if they go down that route. So yeah, I think we're on the right path. We just need to keep going.
And where do you feel the UK is on a worldwide stage? You mentioned the successes in Canada at the moment. Are we lagging behind? As you said, we're at the forefront of BIM. Are we where we need to be on this?
You know what? it's interesting because we've got some clients in the Nordics that we work quite closely with. Probably some of the guys you guys work with at Symetri as well. And yeah, I always had this notion that a lot of the Scandinavian countries were doing things in a very kind of offsite way. And yeah, they're doing some fantastic things around some like timber frames and some of the other things. But again, it's very condensed to just the housing sector. So they're actually I have conversations with people over there, and they're actually looking at what the UK is doing, and seeing the UK is leading by example and trying to take some lessons learned from us. So the Italians have started to adopt MMC as well. So yeah, I think people do look up to the UK in terms of the construction sector. So yeah, I think we're doing fairly well on that front. Again, we just need to continue with the path we're down. Keep kind of pushing through, and hopefully we'll kind of come out the other end, and the construction industry will be a lot better for it.
Okay. And in terms of, again, the future, where will we be in 5, 10, 20 years' time? Do you think there's a point where the majority of construction is done in the factory and not on the site? And how far away do you think we are from that?
Yeah, it's really difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, yeah. I mean, there's two
just
questions.
Give me a perfect answer there. Yeah, 7.5 years will be all done.
I'll just look into my crystal ball. No, I think, yeah, the way the industry is heading, and I really do believe that this is what's needed. That come whether it be 5 years, whether it be 10 years, whether it be 20 years, whether it be within the next generation, and you and I will be too old to kind of witness it. Who knows? But I think we will get to a point in time where traditional construction, as we know it now, is a thing of the past, and offsite construction just becomes construction. Traditional construction, and I think what's slightly frustrating about our industry is I think we're always fairly reactive. We wait for the writing to be right on the wall, and we're all kind of running around trying to work out what's gone wrong. And I'll say that, we know that the challenges ahead, they've been laid out for us for a good number of years now. We need to keep being proactive. We need to keep moving, in the right direction here. And, I think that'll kind of help us as a sector moving forward. Yeah. Cool. Don't know on that.
No, okay. We'll have to wait and see then, I guess, if you're not going to give us the answer to that one.
Yeah.
In terms...
I'm worried you'll quote me otherwise.
Yeah.
You'll have a knock on my door in 10 years' time.
Yeah. In terms of offsite modular construction, do you think this can... it's been done a lot in house building now. Do you think there are other subsectors where this is going to become more prevalent in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think house building was the low-hanging fruit. We've got a huge housing crisis here in the UK. I mean, there's America have got a huge housing crisis as well, so there's lots of this type of work going on over there as well. But for me, and we talk about volumetric modular house building, so the likes of the Cat 1 MMC companies, that's only a small subset of MMC and of offsite construction. So there is some fantastic work going on in some of the other MMC categories, 2 to 7, when you consider some of the panelized systems, bathroom pods, even things like facade components, which, have typically been done in this way for a long time anyway. So, yeah, and I think there's lots of opportunities outside of resi as well. Obviously we've kind of focused around multi-resi or single dwelling for the time being. But yeah, I know of work going on in offsite construction within education and healthcare, and I think it works quite nicely in the commercial space as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities for it to branch out outside of the residential stuff.
Okay, and would it be fair to say, given that you don't see construction organisations, house builders who don't have at least an offsite element existing in the sort of the mid-term future?
Again, I think that one's quite a difficult one to answer, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think there'll always be a need for on-site construction services. That's never going to go away. This idea that every building that we ever produce in the future is going to be 100% built off-site and assembled on-site is probably a bit naive and unrealistic. Especially when you take into consideration different projects and site conditions and everything else that makes up the nuances of a particular project. You might be in situations where for whatever reason you're building a building in the northeast of England, and it quite happens that labour around there is a lot cheaper. So actually, for that particular project, it actually makes sense to go down the traditional route. So I think what we'll get into a position is where we have lots of kind of hybrid buildings and hybrid solutions come into play, where some of it is done off-site and some of it is done traditionally. And I think as long as the industry has the tools at its disposal to make those decisions and make those decisions based on the right bits of information, early on in the project, then I think we'll be in a good place. There's always going to be projects that are better akin to on-site processes. I can't ever imagine walking down the street in London and seeing a bathroom pod craned into an old Victorian terrace house, but who knows? It might happen. So I think there'll definitely be a smaller subset of companies focused on on-site construction in the future, I think.
Cool. And where will we see KOPE in 5 to 10, 20 years' time? Is it going to be a all-encompassing platform running the world?
One can only hope, I think. I hope if we follow through on our vision, and to be honest, that's kind of my main role within the organization, right, is to follow through on the vision we have internally and externally, whether that be driving the product and kind of where we're going with that, or liaising with our shareholders or our investors and our clients. Our challenge at the moment is we are very sure about our vision for the future of construction and our vision for how KOPE fits into that moving forward. Our challenge is how do we incrementally get there, over the next, whatever that might be, 2, 3, 5 years. So I hope we're in a position where our software platform has actually been the catalyst to help a lot of people who are, potentially struggling, moving from those traditional processes to off-site processes, that, we've been the platform that's actually given them the confidence and helped them do that. And we do that through giving a bit more visibility into the supply chain. We give developers and designers the confidence within off-site construction and how to manage risk and, all of these kind of different things. So, I think we've got a pretty exciting journey ahead of us as a company. We've got a fantastic team, great set of investors, as I said, who believe in our vision for the industry. So now it's just about following through on that. So, I think it's an exciting time ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. We on this podcast love to hear about smarter building, and it sounds like you're well on your way to doing that for the foreseeable future. So good luck to you in all that, and thanks very much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Richard.